There's a moment in business that almost nobody prepares you for. It doesn't usually arrive when things are falling apart. It tends to show up when revenue is actually moving in the right direction, but something still feels tight underneath the surface. Clients are coming in. Money is being made. From the outside, it looks like progress. But inside the business, small frictions start to stack. Decisions wait longer than they should. Simple tasks somehow root back to you. Your calendar begins to fill in ways that don't quite match the income growth you're seeing. I remember noticing this in my own work before I had clean language for it. Nothing was visibly broken. If anything, the numbers looked encouraging. But the day-to-day started to feel more compressed instead of more spacious. Your income is growing, but the system still can't move cleanly without you. That realization can be uncomfortable to sit with, because in the early stages, being deeply involved is exactly what builds the business. Your speed creates momentum. Your judgment protects quality. Your proximity to the work is part of why the first dollars show up at all. So when things start to feel heavy later, it's easy to assume it's just the normal cost of growth. For a while, that's what I told myself too. More clients should mean more responsibility. More revenue should naturally create more moving parts. On the surface, that logic feels reasonable. And for a time, it even appears true. But eventually I started noticing a pattern that didn't quite add up. The business was earning more, but it wasn't getting easier to operate. Small things still paused, waiting for my input. Certain decisions always seemed to land back on my desk, and new opportunities, instead of feeling cleanly expandable, sometimes felt complicated. That was the early signal. When income rises, but operational pressure rises with it, the system is scaling dependence, not leverage. Most people miss this moment because nothing feels urgent enough to trigger a redesign. Cash flow is still coming in. Clients are still being served. The business looks responsible and under control from the outside. So the natural instinct is to compensate. You stay more available. You step in quickly when something wobbles. You keep a close eye on quality. Individually, each of those decisions feels responsible. Structurally, though, they quietly tighten the bottleneck. I didn't fully appreciate this until I started paying attention to where decisions were clustering. Certain approvals always required my sign-off. Certain client moments always seemed to escalate upward. Certain operational questions never quite stayed solved inside the system itself. That pattern is rarely random. It usually means too much intelligence is still concentrated in one place. If your income system speeds up and slows down based on your personal bandwidth, you haven't built true leverage yet. That insight changed how I looked at growth entirely. Before, I was mostly watching the revenue line. If the numbers were improving, I assumed the system underneath must be strengthening. But over time, it became obvious that revenue can climb for quite a while, even when the structure underneath is still overly dependent. The more revealing question became quieter. Not, is income growing? But where does progress still pause waiting for me? That question exposed things quickly. I started noticing small but consistent patterns. Weeks where demand was present, but throughput felt capped. Moments where opportunities existed, but expanding them would have required pulling more hours directly from my schedule. Situations where the business could move, but only in short bursts, tied to my availability. None of it looked dramatic in isolation. Together, it painted a very clear picture. The real ceiling on most income systems isn't demand, it's how much of the business still requires the founder's direct attention to function. Once that became obvious, the work shifted. Not toward working harder, and not toward disappearing from the business overnight, but toward something much more deliberate, slowly moving intelligence out of my head and into the system itself. That process is quieter than most people expect. It shows up in documented decisions that don't have to be re-explained, in handoffs that don't require constant supervision, in fewer moments where progress pauses because someone is waiting on you to unblock the next step. At first, the changes feel small. A decision that no longer roots back to you. A client situation that resolves cleanly without your involvement. A week where the business moves forward even while your direct input is lighter than usual. Individually, those moments don't feel dramatic. Structurally, they're everything. Because that's the point where the business begins shifting from founder-powered to system-supported. I remember the first time I felt that shift clearly. The business was still growing, but my day-to-day didn't feel as tightly coupled to every movement inside it. Things were still moving, but they weren't all moving through me. That's when the weight profile starts to change. Real leverage begins the moment your income system can continue progressing without constantly routing back through your time and attention. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't mean you become uninvolved or detached from quality. It simply means the system gains the ability to carry more of its own load. Over time, that changes how growth feels. Opportunities start to feel more expandable. Busy periods don't create the same level of compression, and the quiet background pressure, the one that used to show up every time demand increased, begins to soften. That's usually the inflection point most builders are actually working toward, whether they realize it or not. Because the goal was never just higher income. It was income that didn't require you to personally hold the entire structure together every day. The moment you realize you're the bottleneck isn't a failure signal, it's the doorway to building a business that can finally grow past you.